Welcome, welcome to this women and Ayurveda, an overview of cycles, rhythms, and the elements workshop. Before we dive in, just setting the intention that you've got something to drink, some tea or water, perhaps lighting a candle or having some sacred fire right by you while we engage in this learning together, learning for healing, learning for growth, learning for wellness, learning for our world, learning for vitality, learning for expansion. Women and Ayurveda, an overview of cycles, rhythms, and the elements. May this information be of service to your highest and best aspects of your life. I want to start off by thanking these 4 specific teachers today whose work we will be studying and looking at. Amadea Morningstar, Dr. David Frowley, Mother Maya Tiwari, and Siva Mohan. Okay, let's begin with these beautiful words, this beautiful invocation. A life of balance means that we must reclaim the ancient memory that empowers our health and consciousness. It means we must adhere to the cyclical rhythms of the body, mind, and spirit. It means we must learn how to read the eternal pulse of nature, striving to know the rhythmic signs, signals, and symbols as they materialize with the circling of the lunar wheel and movement of the seasons. This calls for a definitive shift in thinking in the way we view ourselves in relation to the world. A leap of faith must happen if we are to reorient and instigate quantum change in our everyday routine habits. How we respond to the momentum of each day, week, month, and season has much to do with our willingness to relearn our biorhythms and understand their vital interconnectedness with both nature's knowable and unpredictable cadence. And just sitting with that, just soaking that in, taking that in, feeling what aspects of that invocation, of that invitation from Mother Maya Tiwari that comes from the women's power to heal through inner medicine. What aspects of that touched your soul? Feel free to pause and journal. Feel free to screenshot and take some of these words. Feel free to sit with any of the phrases that resonated into your heart. This workshop is inspired by Ayurvedic wisdom of the elements, the doshas, and the stages of life. Ether, our connection to spirit, source, other realms beyond the known. Air, the winds of change, the wind that blows through creativity, spiritual connection, flexibility, and movement. Fire, the element of transformation, of leadership, of power. Water, the element of transformation, of flow, from shape shifting, from liquid to solid, and in between all the spaces of life. And earth, our dirt, our soil, our groundedness, our Mama Earth. Thank you to these 5 elements that create the doshic constitutions that we speak of: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So one of the beautiful teachings in Ayurveda is we have 4 stages of life, all of us interconnected. Nobody is going to bypass this truth. The first stage is the student stage of life, which is up to 25 years old-ish, and is the Kapha or Kapha stage of life, and is associated with Kama is associated with the phase of life dedicated to pleasure, gratification, art, beauty, inquiry, love, and friendship. It's the like essence of pleasure in life. The second stage of life is the householder, which is up to around age 50. It is the Pitta stage of life. And in this stage, we are working most with the concept of arta, which is our prosperity and our wealth, our career path, our financial path, the material comforts you need to live in the world with ease. So in the householder stage, you're perhaps creating a home or a nest. Your main focus, in the kama stage was around pleasure and gratification. And now we move into the main focus being around wealth and creating wealth in a way that honors food, home, community, and path. The third stage of life is around up to age 75. This is the Hermitage stage of life, where we are invited to leave home and be on our own to explore deeper solitude. So typically you might travel at that time, or you might get a cabin in the woods. You might find yourself longing for and seeking retreat. And that is associated with the Pitta Vata transition between the Pitta and the Vata stage of life. And it's associated with dharma, your responsibility, your ethical responsibility, your purpose in life. Now, at this stage of life, you've lived so much, you can see meaning and purpose and connections. And then moving into the fourth stage of life, up to around 100, if we are blessed to live that long, or cursed, depending on how you see it. But to complete the cycle, you would enter the Vata stage between 75 and 100-ish, or postmenopausal. These things are very fluid, and you can have transition years where you have many years in between. This is just kind of to give you the overview. And in that Vata stage of life, you would really be seeking moksha, which is the liberation, the connection to the beyond, the spirit, the Vata, the ether, and the cycle completes. You could also have a condensed version of this cycle where the ages are taken out. So perhaps you get sick in one of the stages. Let's say you get a terminal diagnosis in your Pitta stage of life, right? You could easily move through the dharma and the moksha aspects of your life in a more condensed time. So it's more about the cycle than about the ages, for those of you who are thinking about that. Kama, Artha, Dharma, and Moksha are also called the four desires, the yoga of purpose and fulfillment. So let's talk for a minute about the lifestyle support over your lifespan. We just kind of did the overview of the lifespan. So let's talk about, in general, how we want to be building up our essential natures and fluids through each of the stages so that we can be in our most vital state. Sweet and juicy foods and beverages, building that rasa, which is the plasma. And plasma in Ayurveda and rasa is part of really connecting to the vital essence of life and living. And some of the things that deplete rasa are overworking, over caffeinating, over stressing. So we want to think about these things as rest. Here is an ally, movement and sacred practice as nourishment, encouraging honesty about the changes in our lives can be very potent. So in our 30s, naturally, we start to have hormonal shifts, and Ojas, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is the way that we talk about the vital essence of life and the fluids that flow through. And so we can always be thinking about and nurturing our Ojas. Here are some ideas: the moistening, the breathing, eating in a way that really supports our bones and our structure. As we move into our 40s, we continue with this dance of hormones and shifts, steadying our cycles, making sure that we're having rest and sleep cycles and herbal supports, right amount of food and movement, continuing to move through real awareness of building that ojas. In our 50s, that can be, again, we're talking about ranges for menopausal stages, just more relaxation, enjoyment, and lots of moisture, lots of vata balancing practices, protecting emotional equilibrium in our tissues through our abhyanga, our self-massage. And after menopause, more rasa building, right? More building yin, building the deep, deep nourishment, and continuing to do that through the life stage. One of the things I want to just make sure you know here is each person has all three energies of the doshas inside. We're shifting and changing in response to all of our life changes. And our creative challenge of life is to discover how to invite them all to dance well together. That's the main point that I wanted you to see through this overview is, what does our dance with the hormonal fluctuations, the biological changes that happen through the life cycle, how can we support it through rasa and ojas and food and rest and support and herbs? So as I already went over the 4 desires yoga of fulfillment, we have that kama stage, which is the enjoyment stage, the artha, which is the wealth. And again, the classical definition of wealth is actually like a holistic well-being. And so I don't mean wealth in terms of hoarding money. I mean wealth in terms of food, home, learning, school, career path. Like those are the things that play into a holistic view of wealth building in the artha stage. And dharma is honoring the truth of our experience, of our stories, of our lives thus far. And then moksha is the freedom stage, or turning towards freedom. Just so you know, the 4 desires, there are beautiful questions, journaling questions that I've mapped out for you in the Lola workbook in the holistic framework section. And I have questions for each of these. You can look at them as stages. They are affiliated, like I already showed you, with stages of life. And also you can be working with the 4 desires in this stage of life and really having that dance and playing out with intentionality. What does artha look like to you right now? Dharma, moksha, and kama. And so in the workbook are some great journaling questions on how to work with the 4 desires. Okay, so let's look at a moon cycle. We're going to kind of we're going to be weaving back and forth between stages of life and moon cycles. And thank you again to all of the teachers who provided all of this information from that first slide. So if we look at the very top there, let's look at the moon cycle in this way, actually. Let's look at it in terms of a full moon. Let's look in that middle part, full moon, natural cycle of ovulation. Moon is cooling the earth's energy. Full moon time, full moon bath is a great way to illuminate the rasa and build your ojas. So knowing that there's a full moon illumination and knowing that during that time, honoring moon cycles can be really helpful in order to rebuild ojas and rasa. So that's just kind of like an interesting side note. The new moon time, the natural cycle of menstruation, the natural cycle of bleeding, the sun is absorbing energy from the earth. The dosha's natural state in the monthly cycle. So think about it this way. Menstruation has the vata, and so one way to balance it is rest. Ovulation is the pitta, and so ways to balance it are having sweetness and pleasurable experiences. And post-menstruation is a kapha time, and so it can be great to balance it with doing things and with being more productive and having pitta. So we always want to balance the natural energy that's coming through. So let's talk about monthly rhythms as an overview. This is happening. So let's talk about, again, seasons and cycles in a day, in a month, and in a year. So we've got the winter time, which is the dark time, the new or dark moon, depending on what lineage you come from. We use different language, but it's when you don't see the moon in the sky. A new moon is when you start to just see it, the first sight of it back. And that is a time of bleeding. Now, remember, that is the time from the doshic point of view where it's vata. And so rest is really good to balance that movement and that sort of chaos that can happen. So we've got the winter time of the month, or winter time of the day, or winter time of the year. And then after that, we start to have our waxing, where we start to build up the energy, and that's the springtime. And that's when it's good to like start to create some ideas, start to bring some things to life, right? The rebirth as we start to wax. And then we get into that full moon, that summer. The summer time of day is that 10 to 2 Pitta time, when we've got that really big full moon, like energy of like the height of the day. We get that within the monthly cycle under the full moon time. And then we get it in the seasonal cycle in the Pitta time of year. And then we get the fall, the waning, right? Where the energy starts to come down. The leaves are dropped. We're starting to release and let go of anything that's not serving us. And then we're back into that dark moon. So we're just looking at these overviews as things that happen within our daily life, our monthly life, and our seasonal life. And again, this is in the Lola workbook under holistic frameworks. And there's also an accompanying PDF that goes with it with more journaling questions and invitations for these times of the monthly rhythms. All right, so I've been talking about Ojas. You can close your eyes. I'm going to read to you about Ojas, and you can think of it almost like a little meditation. Ojas is the most refined and subtle essence of the physical body. When fully activated, Ojas is the bliss factor that goes beyond good health to keep you fully immune and strengthened against disease. Ojas is the superfluid slide that links the underlying intelligence of nature to its expression in your mind and body. Ojas is a supremely refined health-giving elixir resulting from perfect digestion, which permeates every cell with life-giving energy. Ojas is responsible for keeping all the cells of the body functioning coherently together, much as the conductor of a symphony orchestra helps all the instrumentalists playing as a coordinated whole in perfect harmony. When Ojas is enlivened, a woman has a healthy glow on her face and the eyes light up. Hormones are communicating the right messages at the right time in the right amounts to all of the cells and DNA. When Ojas is high due to ama-free digestion and metabolism, menopause symptoms are minimal and your body adjusts easily to its inner shift to hormones. Step one of Ojas is knowing about it. So right now in this moment, can you pause? Can you drop in? And can you just name, honor, and see the Ojas flowing through you? There might be some terms in here that you don't know. Ama is toxic buildup. And so at the bottom there, what I said, ama-free digestion. I think that was the only one I wanted to bring up. If there's anything you don't know, feel free to contact me after and we can talk about it. But here's what I love about this concept is Ojas is communication portal to the underlying intelligence of our connection to nature. And when we get out of the way and we digest properly, there is a connection to the unknown realms and to health and vitality and spirit that is Ojas alive. It's the sensual, succulent nature of the dance of the hormones and the stages of life. And in order to build Ojas, we do things like resting when we're tired, moon bathing, having deep relationship with elemental healing of fire and water. Ojas building is love, 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 loving our partners and our family members, and being in loving relationships to nature, to the earth, to the seasons and the cycles. So step one is knowing that something like Ojas exists. Step two is then noticing and naming all of the ways you build Ojas in your own life, orienting towards building Ojas, working with your Ojas. You don't need to focus on the negative here. So much of Ayurveda is about orienting towards what we do want. And so we're orienting towards building Ojas through every stage of life. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about the moon phases with the doshas and the emotions. We've done a little bit of this already, but this is just a visual to show you kind of what's happening through these stages, and where the Ojas is, and what are some things you can be doing as Kapha is rising, turning outward, dancing, moving, sweating, breathing. Community is in that full moon time, the greatest Ojas. Kapha is at peak. And so you want to balance that with being up and out and moving and feeling connected to source and spiritual aspects of your life. The waning moon, where the Vata is rising, and that's where we balance that Vata energy flowing in terms of rest and relaxation and quieter practices. Vata and Kapha are the big players in the cycle, and we've got Pitta in terms of burning through. So Pitta in this situation, right, if we're thinking about Vata and Kapha on sort of the opposite ends of the spectrum, Pitta is in the middle being our fire. And so our Pitta here, our fire here is paying attention to the seasons and cycles. Our Pitta here is having practices that we do during these times of the month and that we stick with them, and we're really focused on them and we really prioritize them. That's where Pitta comes in here. More moon rituals for the dark waning moon. So anytime the moon is dark or the moon is starting to wane, these are some opportunities for you to really be in relationship in a deeper level. And as the full or waxing moon is kind of getting bigger, here are some things you can do that will help you in the ritual sense. And again, these are just ideas and suggestions. Nothing is a have to, but if you think about the different energies between Vata, which is the movement, and Kapha, which is the kind of dense and heavierness, we always want to be working within the balancing, the dancing of the harmony. I'm not going to read through all of these. You can pause it and read through them, ask any questions. Typically this teacher, Siva Mohan, uses language like avoid, or like where she says avoid water, avoid creative activities. That's not language that I would typically use, but I understand what she's saying is there's an excess of that at that point. And so it's like, if you're going to have different times of the month where you have different practices, this would be one where you could do less of that. But again, because Ayurveda is such a living, breathing art and science, we all have different ways of approaching these practices. Healing with moon rituals. So in terms of doshic imbalances, if we currently have imbalances, the healing with moon rituals can just help us tap in that there are these patterns, and then we can be more intentional with our self-healing. We can be more intentional. We don't actually need to know what's happening. We can feel what's happening as we continue to become aware of the seasons and cycles of the daily rhythms and the moons and the stages of life. One of the big things in Ayurveda that is important is that if we have a disconnect from the inner voice, it can really cause a lot of confusion. So if we don't have a steady relationship between sort of chakras or energetic points in the body that really align to head, heart, belly. Those chakra points can be a really powerful place in which to live forward and find inner voice. And so if we have a disconnect, it can be really difficult for us to find our intuitive path, listen to our inner voice, and can cause doshic imbalances. And then the last on this healing with moon rituals, the time and motion is if we don't have circadian rhythms and that cadence that we talked about in the first quote, we get really out of balance. We get really off of what our true nature is, and it can be very, very disruptive to the system. So why the moon? Why do we talk about the moon in terms of Ayurvedic healing? Because it helps us get into a rhythm that's set by nature and then helps us find that harmony. Working with the moon can help us connect to the inner voice and the intuitive aspect, and can also, like I said earlier, help us work within the understanding of time and different phases where there's time to rest and time to be fully expressed. Okay, so this is from Siva Mohan, and this is her inner voice disconnect. I just think it's an important thing to kind of bring into the conversation, that the lack of connection to spirit can really put us into situations where we have a lot of inconsistent choices, internal conflicts, which lead to imbalance in the emotional body, and imbalances in the emotional body lead to imbalances in the physical body. One of the other things that happens when we have inconsistent choices is we also then lose our rhythm. We lose the rhythmic nature of eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, pooping, sort of all of our action items, our verbs each day. And inconsistent choices also lead us into doshic imbalances. And doshic imbalances lead us to internal conflicts and imbalance in the emotional body and imbalances in the physical body. So, you know, this whole idea, this is one of the big differentiators in Ayurveda is like other health systems don't have connection to spirit as one of the foundational principles of eating, living, and breathing in a healthy way. Ayurveda really has the connection to spirit as one of the ways that we create these containers of consistent choices. We build our rhythms. We see ourselves in this greater spiritual world. And from there, we can plug into consistency, plug into balancing, plug into harmony, and plug into rhythm. So this inner voice and connection to spirit are extremely important in Ayurveda. They're a foundational aspect from which we see ourselves represented in nature and in everything. Also, then we're able to work more with self-healing rather than giving that power away. Okay, so here's some more notes on rhythms of life. So these, again, you can think of this sort of as a meditation, if you like, trusting in the waves of doshic elements rising and falling, right? We're learning about the patterns of a life cycle, the patterns of the seasons, the patterns of the doshas, seasons and cycles of vata, kapha, pitta, vata, kapha, pitta. Where I live, vata is heaviest, is like fullest and most expressed between October and December. Kapha really picks up in January through March, April, and then Pitta comes in June, July, August. And then we have these shoulder seasons where they're a collision of Kapha and Pitta, or Pitta and Vata, as we transition. So we're kind of always in a state of these doshic elements being in actual nature and in actual our seasons and in our weather patterns. What else is happening in this cycle is expansion and contraction, or a pulsation that's naturally occurring within the elemental healing and also within us. So where are our rise and falls, right? Where do we rise and fall within the month, within the season, within the cycle, and really naming these as normal fluctuations. When we're talking about anxiety and depression, we're talking about extreme imbalances of Vata and Kapha. And what if we could kind of take that down a notch and find that normal rhythm of times when we have more Vata, and so we might be feeling a little bit more anxious, but without all these labels, more if we feeling really anxious, are we able to access some Vata grounding practices, like rubbing our hands and putting them on our head and breathing, holding our feet, doing self-massage. And so what happens within, and also if we're feeling that kaphic imbalance of depression, isolation, and loneliness, how can we reach out to a friend, phone a friend, call a friend, get up and start moving our body in honor to move that kapha through, to get out of the stuckness. Part of our rhythmic intention is turning unconscious patterns into conscious awakenings, using the elements to ground, support, and nourish. So if we feel cold and unstable, can we light a candle and find some fire? Can we get some warm water flowing through to help us warm up a bit? Can we drink some warm water and really start to use the elements to help us in our healing path? Positive interventions and disruptions over time, season by season, cycle by cycle. This is what I call radical or sacred responsibility for patterns. So if you know that in the summer you feel angry, you feel short, you feel like there's a lot of buildup or residue of that Pitta nature, and you noticed it this summer or towards the end of the summer as it accumulated, putting into your calendar your notes for next summer. Hey, self, I really want to get to swim every day outdoors, and that swimming in water really helps cool my fire. So positive, that's a positive intervention. It's noticing the unconscious pattern that's turning into conscious awakening, and then creating these disruptions. So instead of doing the same, we're adding these interventions and disruptions over time, season by season, cycle by cycle. We have an opportunity, hopefully, if we're still around next year at that season, to practice in that way. And so this, again, is the life path of Ayurveda. This is the feminine form where she flows in and she flows out of each stage of your life, each season of your life. The more that you understand the macro of this, the more you'll start to see the micro, the more you'll start to see in your relationships which of the elements, which of the doshas is really present, and you'll be able to be more skillful at your self-healing in relationships. Another layer of this are the spirals that come up. So certain core wounds or certain issues or challenges will come up again, and we get an opportunity to say, who are we now? How do we respond from this moment, from this doshic balance, from this elemental season? How do we interact with it now? If you have arguments with the same people in the same season, what does that mean? And how might next season you be able to work from a different, more conscious place? And because of those positive interventions and disruptions through the patterns and intentional awareness. So spirals are very normal. Very rarely do I know of humans who have something that comes up and then it just goes away and never comes up again, right? We get to spiral through emotional fluctuations just like we spiral through the seasons. And even, for many years now, I've marked in my journal, we've had January days, right? So January is right in between Vata and Kapha. So you wouldn't think of it as a Pitta time, but every January there's like a day that's 60 and everybody is just like, whoa, I can't believe it's 60 and it's January. And I've noticed that the past few years, and that feels like a burst of energy in the middle of that season. And it's just really interesting to feel the elemental change when it's in the middle of two other seasons. So again, just things to look at and work with and notice. Each cycle has a rest and release. And this is huge for our lives. We need to close the loop of stress. We need to complete stress cycles so that our adrenals can really be supported, nourished, and get an opportunity to kind of turn it down or step back and don't have to be so active. So much of the suffering that we have in our female stages of life relate to adrenal fatigue. And that looks like dryness. It looks like restlessness. It looks like tired and wired, where you can't sleep because you're so wired. It looks like obsession with moving or movement or cleaning or doing things. It looks like not being comfortable in your own body, in your own skin. And so we want to nourish our adrenals. We get an opportunity all through each cycle of the month, each cycle of the year, to have a rest and release and to close out any loops and complete the stress cycle. Rhythms of Ayurveda for life really come down to some basics: noticing the self, noticing the moon, noticing the season, noticing the cycle, paying attention. We have this idea, this teaching in Ayurveda about we don't actually need to know what our constitution is as much as we think we do. Rather, paying attention to what's happening in the moment right now. And I think this is a really important thing to remember with climate change, is that the patterns that we've seen in the past with doshas and the elements may be changing. And so the best, most alive way to be in an Ayurvedic, dynamic Ayurvedic relationship right now is to just be present with what is. So in those 60 degree January days, really listening and feeling into, is this feel more pitta? Does this, what am I feeling here? And how can I address it and work with it here and now, the here and the now? We don't need to be all up in our head about it's not the right season, it's not the right this, it's not the right that. We actually get an opportunity to be present with what's here right now. I'm looking out the window, there's leaves, it's a very gray day. It's a little drizzly. So today is a Vata Kapha type of day. And when I woke up this morning, I heard my body, like, again, this is connection to spirit, inner voice, self, really not questioning it. I really heard sauna. Like, it's going to be really important for my body today to be in the sauna. That feels like a high priority for my care. And given the nature of the day, I want to balance that with some sweat and some heat. So noticing what's happening now rather than what should be happening is a really important aspect of this, turning unconscious patterns into conscious awakenings. And noticing our emotions in your constitution. I think, again, we're kind of layering in the emotional realm, which is just noticing your natural tendency in discomfort. Is it to fight, flight, or freeze? Fight being our pitta nature, flight being our vata nature, and freeze being our kapha nature. These are just general, just noticing how do you tend to respond to things, and is that working for you? Is that something you want to expand and kind of pulse with and not be so tight around, right? It's like the more we know some of this stuff, the more flexible and fluid, the more Ojas is built, because we're not so tight with these unconscious patterns. Signs of imbalances, and this I did through the different life stages. This again is from Siva Mohan, where these are different female life stages: menses, pregnancy, fertility, birth, and menopause. And these are the balances that typically come up: vata, pitta, kapha. Again, these are just overviews. This is not like this is how it is and you have to believe it. I want you to kind of look at it and see, does it make sense to you? Does that feel, does some of these things start to come together for you? What are, and then the question I always ask myself is, what are the parts of this that don't make sense? What are the parts of this that I want to push on or question or deepen my own learning to? Causes of disease, I just put this in here because, again, we're talking about life cycles and moon cycles and female cycles. So typically, dosha, the main causes of disease are the doshic imbalances that accumulate over time. So they start to whisper to us and we ignore them. Then they shout, we ignore them. And then they get so loud that we can't ignore them any longer. An inner voice disconnect. So this is when we only use our mind to make decisions, not integrated, embodied decisions, or we have so much internal mind chatter and conflict that we build up toxic emotional ama. Besides just food ama, we can also have emotional ama and toxic digestive ama that builds up from too much mind chatter, external input, really. And then time and motion. Again, when we fight the wisdoms of nature and the rhythms of nature and the cycles of nature, and we stay up too late, and we either sleep too much or sleep too little, when we work too much, these are the things that cause dis-ease. We can't bypass the natural laws of nature. So I just want to say that from an Ayurvedic perspective, menopause is an oasis of lightness wedged between the phases of fertility and wisdom. Just let that sit with you for a minute, just thinking about if our culture attuned to this version of menopause. Whether you're menopausal, perimenopausal, or postmenopausal, I think that this just resonates so deeply, kind of bringing together the Ayurvedic teachings and stages of life between fertility and wisdom, an oasis of lightness. Keys to healthy menopause. Again, I think this is important to understand because menopause typically is really aggravated by vata imbalances. And so number one, we want to calm vata. Abhyanga, warm, calm, slow, grounded, stable. These are also keys to healthy vata balancing. Number two, harmonizing digestion, paying attention to our relationships with our food, our drink, and our doshic elemental balances and harmonies that are here. Number three, maintain generous rasa, plasma, and that's our warm and wet foods, teas, staying hydrated, lots of broths and soups. Four, building ojas, water, pleasure, sensuality, moon baths, and honoring the elements. We've already talked about ojas. And five, supporting our hormonal balances, loving on our adrenals. If we go into menopause in adrenal fatigue, we will have a lot more consequences. We will feel it a lot more. And so again, adrenals being such an important aspect of our whole health. And we can do that through massage, rest, yoga. Nourishing foods to balance vata, or again, to increase our ojas and to increase and work with our rasa and our plasma. Flax, chia, quinoa, hummus, dark greens, organic ghee, milk, yogurt, butter, sweet potatoes, root veggies, khichdi, rice, and seaweed. Tools for balancing vata, pitta, and kapha. Here are just some herbs, oils, and foods, just an overview that might be helpful for you to get kind of the sense of what can help us be more in balance and harmony through the life stages, through the moon cycles, and through our days, really, how we can work today if we feel a kapha imbalance or pitta imbalance or a vata imbalance. And last, this beautiful quote by Don Miguel Ruiz of Mastery of Love that really captures the essence of what we're doing here. If you catch yourself in the track of fear, and remember, fear in Ayurveda is vata, just by having that awareness, you can shift your attention into the track of love. And love is kapha in Ayurveda and ojas. Just by seeing where you are. So where are you today? Where are you in this moment? What's happening around you? Just by changing and shifting your attention, everything around you will change. So just by realizing that there is a track of fear, overwhelm, and anxiety that's very highly contagious, and that there is a track of love, steady, stable, loving, whole, warm, that just by noticing that there's different tracks, different orientations that our mind, body, soul can be spiraling in, just by knowing that, just by naming that, just by shifting attention out of fear and into love, we can start to lean back and let everything around us change. We can start to see ourselves represented in the trees, in the earth, in nature, and in the elements. We can see our fire, our element of transformation and leadership. We can see our own air and ether, our element of spirit and connection to something bigger. We can see ourselves playing out. We can see our kapha. We can see our own element of water and earth, of being fluid and being supportive and stable. And so may we find ourselves in the tracks of love. May we find ourselves building ojas, deep, nourishing path to aging, our deep and nourishing path of understanding the seasons and cycles of life, the connections and the rhythms that are so much around us, expanding and contracting and pulsating already. We don't have to do anything. It's already happening. May this workshop be of service to your highest and best. May these teachings nourish and heal us, our homes, our communities, and our world.